Welcome, all of you. Thank you for following us in our webinar series. I would like to remind you that our webinars are composed by a lecture of Professor Rahat of around half an hour, and then we'll open to question and answers. If you have any question, you can either write it in the chat or raise your digital hand and we'll open your microphones. I would like now to present to you Professor Rahat. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and a senior fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. His research fields are comparative politics and Israeli politics. His interests include political parties, electoral reform, the personalized of politics and candidate selection methods. He has published numerous academic articles and several books. His current research projects are the Oxford Handbook of Israel Politics and Society with Reuven Chazan, and which will be published by Oxford University Press, and the Elections in Israel 2019-2020 with Michal Shamir. So please, Gideon, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening. And the name of the book is The Elections in Israel 2019-2021, and you know, who knows?
Yeah, I should thought about that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the four elections, the three that we had and the one that we're going to have. And so first, let me remind you that the first election in April 2019 took place after more than 4 years, which means that we had experienced quite long living government, a lot of stability. And this government, I would remind you, was a government of 61 to 60, was supported by 61 to 65 members of Knesset. And this is a minimal coalition. And these small coalitions are actually the more stable one, according to the literature. And then after the first election did not produce a victory for Netanyahu, but neither could Gantz even try to establish a government. The Knesset has ousted itself, dissolved itself, and we had new elections in September 2019. After both Netanyahu and Gantz failed to establish a new government, we had new elections in March 2020. And these elections produced a government that started to function, but once again fell prematurely because it did not pass the budget. And according to the Israeli law, if you do not pass the budget up to a certain point, and at this incident they even extended this point, the government is ousted, and once again we have new elections. So I mean, you look at it and you look back and you remember that in Israel, although we didn't have elections on time, in most instances we had elections on average every 3.5 years, while the law is about having elections about every 4.5 years. So what happened? So we have several explanations, and these have to do first, I think, maybe the explanation that we all know and we all have to take into account is it's a personal matter. We have a prime minister that there are allegations about his corruption, and he's trying to fight for his life, for his name, for his future. So he's trying to reshuffle the cards again and again until he will get his victory, his 61 seats, that is Likud, the ultra-Orthodox and the National Orthodox together, if they will have a majority. The claim is that he hopes that they will change some of the rules that in a way that will defend him vis-a-vis being in trial or being convicted or being ousted until the end of his trial that may take forever. So this is the first explanation, and this is not a weak explanation, it's quite convincing. So it's about reshuffling, and it's a personal explanation. Another explanation have to do with this guy, Lieberman. Lieberman was supposed to be, that's how we all saw it, a natural member of the right-wing religious coalition. He was a member of these coalitions for many years. He was seen as part of Netanyahu's bloc. He doesn't like Netanyahu, he doesn't like the judiciary, all of these things that have to do with the Supreme Court, allegation about corruption. He was also, there were allegations against him for many years. He was under investigation. So, I mean, there was no reason to predict how he will behave. But then, since the first election and more in the second and third, he reinvented himself and became, while he didn't change his ideology, he put more and more emphasis on his anti-clerical stance vis-a-vis especially the ultra-Orthodox parties, but also what we call the Chardalim, the national ultra-Orthodox. So this is once again about two people, and the Israeli politics these days is more and more a game of persons, about personalization, about personalized politics, and less about political parties, about groups. However, there is a third explanation. In 2014, that can be added. In 2014, Israel has adopted a very important change in the rules of the game that was supposed to give Israel stability, and it might have given Israel stability. Since 2015, we had a very stable government until 2019. And this is what we call the constructive vote of confidence, of no confidence. Once we have a government in Israel, it cannot be ousted unless there is a majority for another government. And unless, I mean, there is a majority in the Knesset that will vote for new elections. So the claim would be that coalition partners would be afraid of joining government, because once you join the government, you do not have as much power as politicians had in the past to blackmail or to pressure all the time. But once you supported the government is there. So your power as a coalition partner is reduced. So we might think that part of the explanation is, for example, that Lieberman didn't want to join Netanyahu's government because he knew that once he would be inside, he wouldn't be able to change. So he wanted to have promises before he joined the government rather than entering it, and then his blackmail power is quite reduced. So I think that's these are the explanations for this instability, for having one election after the other. Of course, if you want to add explanations of your own, you're most welcome. So if we look at and we compare the election results, the three elections, we can see that the Israelis are amazing in the sense that they are not getting tired. In other countries in which you have lower turnout, like United States, Switzerland, the claim is that when people have a lot of voting opportunities, they will not continue to vote in there wouldn't be high levels of electoral turnout because people would have what we call electoral fatigue. But if you look at the third line, you can see that the the turnout in Israeli elections has increased from one election to the other. Well, if you look at it more closely, we can claim that among the Jews, the turnout has remained more or less the same. Most of the increase in election turnout was of the Arab citizens because they thought they would have an opportunity to influence Israeli government, and because the joint list was reestablished at September election and looked like had a great electoral success. It got 13 seats and then 15 seats thanks to very improved turnout among the Arab voters. And second, if you look at electoral volatility, you can see that Israeli voters are moving and moving and moving. First, in April 2019, these results tell us that at minimum, this is a minimum number, a quarter of the people changed the way they voted in comparison to previous elections. And then in September and in March, we see that 9% and 7%, and this is the minimum, changed their vote. These are very high numbers in comparison to other countries. You get 9%, 7% volatility, change in the way that people vote from one election to the other. In normal elections in many countries, in Israel, people change the vote from one party to the other. So when we say that people are not tired yet, they come to vote and they change their vote quite frequently. That's what I mean by saying that. Okay. If we look at, if we compare the votes for the different blocks, we can, in Israel we have multi-party elections, but if we take the blocks, the Netanyahu bloc, the parties that support Netanyahu, Likud, Yahadut HaTorah, the ultra-Orthodox, and the national religious parties, vis-a-vis the anti-Netanyahu bloc, blue and white, the Arab parties, Labour, Meretz, and all the others on the center left. And we have also the not identified parties, which are mainly Lieberman and his party, that is neither left nor right, and the others are just very small parties. If you look at the results for every election, you can see that in no election did Netanyahu, in the first election, Netanyahu had a majority among the voters, but it was translated only to 60 seats, and this was not enough for establishing a government because two parties that supported him, Moshe Feiglin's Zehut and Naftali Bennett's party, did not pass the electoral threshold of 3.25% of the votes. A lot of votes were wasted. On the second elections, Gantz had his best result. You can see 46 seats for the anti-Netanyahu, 46% of the vote, and 57 seats for the anti-Netanyahu bloc. And then the third election, we see that Netanyahu is becoming stronger. His bloc is becoming stronger, but nevertheless, there is no clear victory. Nobody passed the line of the 61 seats each bloc have minority of the seats, and in the middle there is the bloc mainly of Lieberman, who is willing to go with the two, with Netanyahu and Gantz. But then when they finally go together on March 2020, they don't have no reason to take him with them. So at the end, what we can really see here is how elections, multi-party elections, are all about one person for him, against him, and you can see somebody who is not identified. Okay, you're supposed to see the PowerPoint. The whole screen is you see the PowerPoint. No? I see the PowerPoint presentation needs to be large and the speaker small.
Yeah, I'm trying to check if it's a problem of the Zoom or a private problem of the attendees. So you can keep going. I will take care about that.
Okay. Okay. So my last point. What we're going to have? What is in the future? So the same would be the main theme of the elections. On the one hand, Netanyahu. On the other hand, all of the forces against Netanyahu. Once again, the election, the center of the election would be about him, whether you support him or whether you are against him, and the parties would make a clear point, a clear stand about it, most of the parties or maybe all of the parties. But this is going to be the fourth round, once again, reshuffling the cards against and for Netanyahu. It would also be the same when we talk about the components of the Netanyahu supporters, the Netanyahu bloc. It would be Likud, it would be the religious parties. We are not sure about the so-called new right with Bennett and Shaked. We are not sure what is their stand. They used to belong, they signed a declaration that they belong to Netanyahu's bloc previously, but in these elections, it is not clear what would they prefer. And there are reasons to think that they can go with either Gideon Rahat or with Netanyahu. So this is something that has changed, but all of the other parts, Likud and Ultra-Orthodox, would be with Netanyahu. All of the others, save for the Bennett and Shaked, are clearly against. We have the same electoral system. We have the same incentives. It's very important to remember that electoral systems create incentives for voting and for politicians. So the same electoral system is there and give the same incentives. For example, we have another week in which we will see many political parties come together in order not to waste vote, in order to be sure that they are going to pass the threshold. So they will come together, and this is have to do with the electoral system. On the other hand, this is not a presidential system. It's not Netanyahu versus another candidate for the head of the executive, but it is at the end of the day, the people of Israel are selecting, electing a party for parliament. It's only then, after the elections, that the parties come together, create a coalition, and create a government. Another thing that we have to remember is that the Rubicon was crossed. Once the Israeli Knesset did what they did after the March 2019 election, that is ousting itself, then it happened again and again and again. And this is really something abnormal. Just imagine yourself getting a new job that you really, really wanted. For months as you ran and you asked people to support you. And then you get there and you vote to fire yourself, to oust yourself. This is something that doesn't make any sense for anyone who looks at politics. But once they did it, they can do it again and again and again. And this is really worrying, because we might have a fifth elections if this is something that is possible. And this is something that is possible. Again and again, people are elected to parliament and they oust themselves from office. Another thing that is the same as it was is that most parties are not political parties in the old sense anymore. These are not mass political parties. These are not strong political parties. These are gatherings of candidates. We may even say that in order to be selected these days, what people are doing is that they form a new party, and then they ask other people to take them to come together and to run. So politicians select parties rather than parties select politicians. That's what happens especially in the center left after the collapse of Blue and White, of Gantz party. But it also happens on the right, as we can see, with Saar leaving the Likud. What would be different in the new elections, in the 2021 elections? First, instead of having a horse race with two who run neck to neck, Gantz and Bibi, we will have many horses running against Bibi. He will look on his right, he will see Bennett and Saar. On his left, he will see, I don't know, but maybe Huldai, Gantz, Lapid. The Arab parties would run anyhow in their, whether a joint list or not. He will have so many horses to compete with. And this is not the same. And he might, that's what I read in the newspapers, but it makes sense. He might decide that these elections, instead of having a lot of negative propaganda, maybe he will try also to be positive, because his best card would be to say, I'm the big leader. For 10 years I run this country. Who are these people? They are not, they cannot do it. They are not leaders as I, they do not have these leadership qualities that I have. And he might do it because for many years, what Netanyahu is doing quite successfully is not allowing any successor to grow either close to him in Likud or in other parties. You can see where Gantz is now and where Netanyahu, just to understand how successful he is in defeating possible people, possible challengers. What is also different is that the Arabs are not a threat anymore. Netanyahu used to paint his electoral enemy as the left that will go with the Arabs, etc., etc. These days, he's trying to go and ask the Arabs to support him in the name of his leadership quality, in the name of his ability to supply what others could not supply for them. So the Arab role has changed in these elections from an arch enemy into a possible electoral market. I don't know if it will continue forever, but at this point, the same person who said to his voters, be careful, the Arabs are coming, in bus loads of Arabs is coming to vote in 2015, is now becoming, let's say he changed his ways. He's trying to recruit Arab voters. What is also different is that the right is divided and the center left is even ultra divided. So we have more divisions. As I said, more horses are running, more divisions. This might influence the results of the elections if one or two parties fail to cross the threshold. This can change the election results. As we saw in 2019, the first elections, if two right-wing parties would not fail to pass the threshold, Netanyahu would be the prime minister with a very stable government at this point in time. What is also different is that now we have a new government between elections. Gantz is running for elections and other people from his party as members of the ruling coalition. So there is some difference there. And my last word is we did not mention COVID yet. So I think that Netanyahu predicted that the COVID cycle would work for him because we have many vaccinations in Israel. So he thought that many people would be vaccinated until the elections. And we now have we have a lockdown, I think you call it. This would end in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, and then in the elections, we will be in a better era. However, COVID is not a politician. COVID is a virus, and in the last few days, as everyone reads in the papers, there is a realistic fear that it's not only that it's not over, there might be some mutations that would change reality, and this might not work well for Netanyahu, that hoped that on March he will get into the elections after lockdown, after people in Israel would be, there wouldn't be a lot of COVID, a lot of people that are sick and hospitalized. So that's what I wanted to say. I think that I still have 3 minutes to talk, but I'll stop right now, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay. Thank you a lot, Gideon. It was very interesting. As you said, we're open now to the question, so you can write them in the chat or raise your digital hand. Okay, we have a first question. No, he disappeared. Okay.
Joseph Oscar, yeah, please.
Okay, I unmuted you. Let's wait.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good evening. Gideon, good evening. I'm Joseph Oscar, Israeli living abroad. I'm wondering whether it's not time to change the electoral system. The proportional system, I think, is no longer delivering. And maybe we should look to Britain, for example. The British system seems to be giving better stability. Even the German system, which has been copied to some extent by Israel, has gone into trouble. Maybe the British system is in a better shape, and maybe we should adopt that, because it cannot go on forever with elections like that.
Okay, it's a very good question. I think for many years, for maybe 30 years, I also belong to Research Institute, or so-called Research and Do Institute, and we try to promote electoral reform and also other mechanisms that, let me put it this way, if they were adopted, we wouldn't be in this situation. Some of the mechanisms are really, really easy to adopt and implement. For example, if the Israeli law would be that the head of the large party is becoming the prime minister, automatically, without a need for a vote of investiture, like it happens in many countries, we wouldn't have 4 elections. But you know, you're right, if we would have a different electoral system, I wouldn't adopt the British system, but there are other options that will allow Israel to have stronger parties, larger parties. But these are things that we try to promote and we fail to promote. The only large reform that was ever adopted in this sense was in the 90s, the direct election for the prime minister, which was a disaster because people had 2 votes. One, they voted for the prime minister, the other, they voted for political parties. And the system was even more fragmented than today. So direct election for the prime minister was really bad, but of course, you're absolutely right. There are remedies for this situation, which have to do with electoral reform or changes in the rules of establishing and ousting the government. Okay, next.
Thank you. We have a question from Nili Sikorsky, and she's asking, are all candidates declared now or still coming? And also, she heard, for instance, that Cohen from the Mossad or the mayor of Tel Aviv have good chances if they present themselves.
Well, that's how Israeli politics looks. Every day we have a new star that is coming into politics. We had a superstar, Gantz, and together with him we had 2 more chief of staff, former chief of staff generals, and this was once again, it was an electoral success, but not a political success. I think from my point of view as a political scientist, all of these attempts to bring new people again and again, different stars to the game in order to oust Netanyahu, this is not a very good dynamic. I think that what would be better for Israeli system is to have strong political parties, strong teams, and not and all of this politics of this star and that star. It didn't prove itself, in my opinion. I hope that one day we will have stronger political parties, more cohesive political parties, because it doesn't work this way with all of these personalized politics. When politics is all about this candidate or that candidate, politics is a game of teams. Lionel Messi is a big star, but he needs all of the other 10 players of Barcelona in order to play and to play good and to implement the things he can do. So I don't believe in this politics, and it makes me worry. From my point of view, it's really worrying, this fragmentation and collapse of the Israeli political parties. Next, please.
We have Gideon Goldenberg. He raised his hand, so you can speak now. Philip?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm speaking from London. Don't you dare adopt our system. What you need is proportional representation, not at a national level, but at a local level. And therefore, by definition, you have higher thresholds. Have a look at the Irish system. Now, the question is this. One of Netanyahu's greatest arguments has been how much he's got out of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in fact, Netanyahu has been sort of Donald Trump in a kippah. So now that Trump has mercifully vanished from the scene, will that change the dynamics of this upcoming Israeli election?
Okay, so first, I hope also that we wouldn't adopt your system, and you're absolutely right. We should adopt districts, but multi-member districts, and so proportional representation would be at the level of the districts. Now about Netanyahu and Trump. So Donald Trump loss is, of course, a big loss for Netanyahu. They were very good friends. He achieved a lot from Trump. And on the long run, he will have probably some troubles in his dealings with United States, because I don't think that the Democrats will forget how he, for example, worked with the Republicans in Congress against the treaty with Iran and other things that he did. So I'm sure that there would be some troubles there, even though nobody admits it at this point in time. On the other hand, I'm not sure I can see how it will influence the forthcoming elections unless Biden would do something that to remind Netanyahu that he's there and that he's mad at him. It doesn't look that he have the time for it. I mean, United States is in a big crisis because of COVID, etc. So I'm not sure that he will find the time to revenge or whatever. So I don't see how it will influence the forthcoming elections. And you have also to remember that in Israel, Trump is also seen as a great friend that gave Israel whatever it wants, etc., etc. People in Israel do not care about how many Americans see Trump, and they thought that everything that he did was good for Israel. Some people may claim that the way Trump led the United States has weakened the international stand of the United States, but most Israelis don't see it this way.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, but first, Nilish is asking if you can update on what the poll says, and that maybe can help all of us to understand better.
Well, according to the polls, the Netanyahu bloc, even if we include Bennett and Shaked, does not have a majority, and the anti-Netanyahu bloc does not have a majority unless it goes together with the joint list, the Arab joint list, and this is not an option, especially not when a large part of the anti-Netanyahu bloc is about right-wing parties. So as much as the elections polls are looking at this point in time, no real change. People are more or less, the voters are staying within the anti-Netanyahu or the pro-Netanyahu camp. What can change after the elections is maybe different coalitions. So Bennett and Shaked might be very important, not in giving Netanyahu the support he needs, at least according to the current polls, that he needs to establish a government, but maybe they will have enough support to give Saar the prime ministership, if Saar can build a large anti-Netanyahu coalition from Meretz to Bennett and Shaked, which would be very, very hard. And this might be a coalition that would only be able to agree on very few things, among them, I hope, electoral reform.
So
okay.
we have now a question from Inbal about the current ongoing protest wave. Which is the influence of those protests to our political situation?
Well, I think that the protest is an important phenomena. First, it is a very good sign that democracy is still here. Like having elections every other day, which is also a sign for democracy, because you can always change the government in other ways, and having elections means that you're still a democracy. I cannot really estimate the influence of these demonstrations. I think that they are important, again, as a sign for living and kicking democracy. But what is their influence? I would be able only to estimate it, we, political scientists, everyone, only when we will have a perspective. We can look back at the 2011 protest, which was a kind of social protest, and we can see that things has changed following this protest, but not all of them in the way that someone would predict. For example, this was a social protest, and who became quite strong thanks to this protest? Yair Lapid, who is not a social democrat, maybe a liberal or even neoliberal in his socio-economic approach. So I don't see, I don't know what to say. And also you have to remember that once you have this protest, there is also some people who react against it. There is a framing. There used to be a framing that COVID is because of the protesters and stuff like this. People do not buy it anymore, probably, but the protest is cannot really have a lot of influence on politics as much as elections have. But once again, protest is a very important part of politics, and it shows that there are energies in the anti-Netanyahu's camp. But the translation of these energies to electoral politics is very, very tricky. Okay.
Well, now a question from Giorgio Gomel. He's saying, he wrote, concerning the Arab vote, the joint list recorded a major success in last election with high turnout and 15 seats. Yet no Arab influence in the Knesset because of Gantz's rejection of their offer to support the government. There is now likelihood of one, perhaps two Jewish Arab parties running on an egalitarian basis, on basis of equality, social justice, and peace. What's your opinion?
Well, seeing any cooperation between Jews and Arabs, from my point of view, Zionist point of view, is very good, because the whole idea of the Israeli state is at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day is cooperation between Jews and non-Jews. But these parties, I do not expect them to have huge success. As much as I can see it, the Arabs can either vote for the joint list, which is all about them, about their ideology and about Arab representatives, or maybe if they say, okay, I give up on having, changing my status, but I want to get something from the government, maybe maybe actually Netanyahu or other parties in government will get some support. But these joint lists, I cannot see where they would get their support from. I think if it's a nice idea, it's a very good idea, but I'm not sure that it will work. I would be surprised if this would be effective. I mean, the only sign I can think about that it might be effective is the fact that Meretz party in the first election in March in April 2019 had won one seat from the Arab vote because it had two Arab candidates in its first out of its first 5 candidates. It had 2 Arab candidates, so it got nice support from Arab voters. But this kind of cooperation, I'm not sure it will work, and you have to work for many years in order to have these cooperations. We used to have these cooperations within Mapam party, even Labour Party, but this has fell apart in the last few years, in the last decades actually. So I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised to see that it will be effective in getting Arab vote or a lot of Jewish vote.
We have now from Montreal a question from Stephen Lipper. Will the anti-COVID behavior influence an anti-ultra-Orthodox wave in the elections?
That's a very good question. It's a good question because in the past we had a few anti-clerical parties that succeeded. The huge success of Shinui in 2003 with 15 seats, and this was at the days when the Palestinian uprising, the second Intifada, was there. With terrorist attacks, etc., and this party got 15 seats because of people were mad at the ultra-Orthodox. And these days, many people feel that the ultra-Orthodox behavior when it comes to COVID, the fact that they do not care about the lockdown, they open their yeshivas, etc., while the non-ultra-Orthodox people sit at home with their kids and, let's say, obey more than them. It makes people angry. Whether it will influence voting, I don't know. I mean, Lieberman is the guy that's supposed to get the anti-ultra-Orthodox vote because he had a point. He didn't want to join a government with them. He had demands from them. But I think on the other hand, all of the politicians probably think that after the elections, they will have to join with the ultra-Orthodox if they want to have a government, because the power of the ultra-Orthodox has become almost mythical. Now, it's not really mythical, the power of the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox are great coalition partners because their demands are quite limited. They do not demand huge budgets for all of the population. They do not demand anything that have to do with foreign affairs and security. They just demand the status quo in terms of how the country behave when it comes to religion, and they ask for budgets that will let them keep their society not as a rich society, but as a very poor society, but a society that allegedly invests all of its power in studying the Torah. So I think all of the politicians are kind of mixed. They know that it might be wise to use it in order to get votes, but on the other hand, at least at this point in time, they still think that one day they will have to cooperate with them, so they should not burn all the bridges. Okay.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions. So we have a question from Anne Valle. Why is electronic postal voting not possible in Israel?
Electronic postal voting is impossible in Israel because nobody even dare to think about it. We talked about it and raised it from time to time with people from the National Electoral Commission. I would say something like this: it's a matter of legitimacy. I mean, some people can make the case that it is possible to vote these days using the internet, using the postal voting, using whatever, and that this is secure. I mean, we buy things on the internet, we go into our bank account, we sometimes, we take large amounts of money and put it here or there. But people still, at least in Israel, we didn't even start to think how to legitimate these things, and these things takes time to legitimate, and people are afraid of manipulations. And I think there is a point also of being afraid of manipulations, because as much as I understand, there are forces in this world that are not democratic, that do everything that they can to show how democracy is fragile, to make such elections, to go into them and to manipulate them and change and try to influence them. So I think it's impossible to do it, even though at the days of the pandemic, it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Professor Rahat. I think we are out of time. So I would thank all of you for being with us today. You will receive the recording in the next days, and hope to see you in the next webinars of the Hebrew University too. Thank you a lot, and thank you, Professor Rahat, for your very interesting lecture.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And
thank you to you.
Have a good day.
Later out.
Later.